Hello, everyone. You can hear me? You unmuted me. So,
Yep, we can hear you,
hey,
Darren.
I'm just uh, really excited to be here. I'm excited to support Joe Biden's presidency. I'm excited to run as a Democrat here in probably the most Republican district in the country. And a Democrat hasn't won in 42 years. And so I'm just really excited. My people have lived here for thousands of years. Up until recently, I've been the chairman of the Shoshone Nation, and that's given me a lot of opportunities and a lot of doors to open and break down. And so I come from those marginalized communities where I've had to work with government leaders. So I'm just honored to be able to join you guys today and take some questions and move forward. I live here in the beautiful Cache Valley in Logan near Utah State University since September, but I think I've made my home in almost every county within the first district. And let me just say this, I'm the only candidate that lives in the district. So I'm excited about that because that means I'm invested. And I know what policies and what things are important to the people in this district. And I will work hard to make sure that we take care of those people. So, Meridian, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for doing that, Darren. So we're going to go ahead and get started with some questions that Hunter prepared for us to ask you today, Darren. So what do you admire most about growing up here in Utah?
What or who?
What did you
What?
admire?
What did I admire most about the diversity? I mean, so my parents both worked and I was dropped off at my grandmother's home almost every day. And my grandmother's name was May Timbimbu. She was our tribal historian. She'd met probably 3 or 4 presidents of the United States, and she'd been back to Washington, D.C. to testify in Congress numerous times. Her dogged work had the Bear River Massacre. They used to call it the Battle of Bear River. And because of the work that she did, it was changed to the Bear River Massacre. But she would take me on field trips. We were hunter-gatherers forever. And she would take me to western Box Elder County to harvest pine nuts, or here in the Cache Valley to pick choke cherries when they were in season. So the thing I admired most about growing up here is I kind of had a feeling for my people, how they traveled and used the different diverse places in here to survive. And so growing up with that, knowing what we have in every corner of the state, and especially in the indigenous homeland of the Shoshones, really was a really important thing in my life, and it's shaped who I am today as far as living a sustainable life and taking care of the environment and things like that. So those things are really important to me.
Thank you for sharing that, Darren. We're going to move on to the next question. What was it like growing up as Native American within the LDS Church? What kinds of perspectives did this give you growing up and being a tribal leader later in adulthood?
That's an interesting question. So, look, I tell people I'm a 6th-generation Shoshone Mormon. It's kind of weird, right? I get that. After the massacre, the survivors ended up being baptized into the LDS Church. And so my experiences when I was younger are different than the experiences I have today. And let me just quickly share that. When I was younger, the Mormons and the LDS faith believe in the Book of Mormon, and they have a story about Native Americans descended from these people, Lamanites. And so when I was younger, I was always kind of proud of that heritage, that, you know, it tells us how we got here. And it was explained that way. And as a child, you kind of grasp onto that. Now, as I've gotten older, and I have a lot of friends that are historians, and you start looking at things, and I think the church has even backed off the Native Americans being Lamanite things because of DNA and other things. So just over time and maturity, and the older I get, you start looking at different perspectives. And so you think, well, maybe I wasn't a descendant of that. You start questioning a few things. But what it's really done is it exposed me to other thoughts and other perspectives that are out there. And look, I'm still active LDS. I haven't disowned the church or anything else. But I like to tell people history's complicated. And what really shaped me in the last few years is if we were descendants of those people, and Brigham Young knew that when they moved here, why were they trying so hard to take our land from us and really not counting us as citizens at all? So, we start looking at things like that, and you say, well, yeah, we're a covenant people according to the Book of Mormon, but we have the land that you want. That becomes more important. And so just navigating those waters and still having a faith that I don't have to believe in every little thing. And I have absolutely belief that men and women make mistakes all the time, and they're not perfect, and they're infallible. And so those growing up that, and then learning and going to school and learning more and really diving into the history of my people has given me a different perspective on what that looks like. And as a tribal leader, I've just tried to be open to everyone's perspective. It's really important that we listen. Now, we don't always have to agree, but one thing you'll find about me as a leader is my ability to sit down and take something that somebody said that may not necessarily, I might not agree with, but I can listen to it and work out a way that we can get things done. And so that's really what shaped me in my life.
Thank you for sharing that, Darren. Moving on to the next question. What was your fondest memory growing up within Congressional District 1?
Kind of going back to my grandmother, my fondest memories as a child were going out and picking pine nuts on the West Desert in Utah. And going just, I know it's not in Utah, but just over the border in Idaho when the salmon were in the river. Here in the Cache Valley, the choke cherries. Just those memories of going with my Native American side of the family and on hunting trips to places that they told me that their parents had taken them and their grandparents had taken them for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so pretty much traveling in that travel corridor. So my dad was a school teacher though, and his first teaching job was out in Vernal at Union High School. And so I lived for the first few years of my life in the Uinta Basin. And I travel out there today quite often to Fort Duchesne to visit the Ute tribes in my capacity as a Shoshone leader. So it's good to go back home. It's good to see the diversity of the mountains and just climate and other things that Utah has to offer. And so those things are really important to me.
Yeah, kind of transitioning more into talking about your political career. What inspired you to get into politics, and then what moved you to become a Democrat in this traditionally conservative district?
I know my Republican friends ask me that question every day. And I'll answer the last one first. My answer is, they say, why did you run as a Democrat? You could have run as a Republican. And I said this one thing: I like people and I care about people. And that's why I'm a Democrat. And so making sure, I come from a marginalized community. people of color. And even though I'm educated and I was blessed in my life to be able to be educated and do that, there are so many communities here within our communities that are not. And really, as in my capacity as a tribal leader, and I wrote a book called The Bear River Massacre, a Shoshone History. I have the opportunity, before COVID shut everything down, I was probably lecturing or speaking 3 to 4 times a week somewhere around the country. And I made a statement to my wife, and I said that, I made a statement speaking one night, and I said that I can't change history, and I don't want to change history, but I can change the future. And then I said this: some of the greatest crimes in the history of our country are not caused by hatred, but by indifference. And I said, it's time for good people to stand up and make a difference. And on the ride home, she said, do you really believe what you said? And I didn't know what she was talking about. And she said that it's time for good people to stand up and make a difference. And she said, if you really believe that, why wouldn't you consider running for a political office and being able to do what you've done with your tribal nation and the government? Why don't you do that for the masses and do it for people? She said, you are one that brings people together and to try to make a change and try to do good by everybody. And so that really got me thinking about my role, especially as I've gotten older. A tribal leader is wonderful. I lead a tribal nation, but I think I have so much more to offer. And my perspectives, I just feel that way. And so we hear so much from the people on the left, the extreme, and the people on the right. But I think there's a whole bunch of us that reside in this middle space that are tired of the hate speech, tired of the divisiveness today. And so I decided to run to try to make a difference. I've always said, I'm one that can bring people together for the common good. And so that's why I'm running. And I'm running as a Democrat because I care about people. I want to make those changes for communities that have been marginalized and not heard, because I am one. We lived here, but yet we didn't get voting rights until 1964. And in a lot of cases, we're still fighting the right to be able to vote today. So that's what really inspired me to run as a Democrat, because I think the Republicans have left everyone behind. And so that's why.
Absolutely, and I completely agree. I think you're absolutely there to help build those bridges, which kind of transitions to our next question. Something that you speak of a lot when you're doing public engagement is being a bridge builder. What does being a bridge builder mean to you, and why does being a bridge builder, why is that good for the Utah community and the country as a whole right now?
What a bridge builder means to me is someone that can hear all the facts and not necessarily dig in your heels to, on one side or the other, and listen. I think a bridge builder is one of their greatest assets is the ability to listen to someone that has a different opinion than you. And so I've been able to do that my whole life. I have things that are important to me. I have things that I will not compromise on. But I think for the most part, our system today is broken because people refuse to listen and work together. And so I've always been one to work together. Even though I don't believe like you believe, I think the way you treat people in a business meeting or in any kind of a meeting goes a long ways towards them maybe dropping down some of the barriers and be able to work together with somebody that thinks different than you and make a change. And that's really what our country needs today. I've never seen it this divided. And it scares me. 4 more years of the current administration just scares the death of me, because uh, we've never been as divided as we are today, if you turn on the news. And so I just think there's a message in there for somebody that uh, wants to bring this country back together and do it in a loving, give people hope again. And so I think we can get there, and I absolutely want to be a part of that.
Absolutely. And that's something that I really admire and have noticed while I've done my work with you is your ability to build bridges across party has just been insane and just has really given me a lot of hope for the future of this district and this country as a whole. You mentioned that you could not stand having another 4 years of this administration. So why are you voting for Joe Biden, and why do you believe he is the candidate for our current times?
That's an easy one, and I hope everybody tuned in. If you're tuning in here, you turned into the Democratic convention. And so what I love about Joe Biden is he offers us hope. In a world that has no hope, he offers hope. And I was so happy to see his vice president nominee, Kamala Harris. I actually really wanted her to be the president when the whole thing started. I was absolutely on board with her, and Joe would have been my second choice back then. But you get them both, and it doesn't matter as long as you get them both. But I think they hold out hope for a nation that has lost hope. Lost hope because the current leader, you can't trust one thing that comes out of his mouth. And you can't, he's not in it for the good of the people of America. And I absolutely look at Joe Biden's service to this country over the last 30, 40, 50 years, and the sacrifices that have come because of that with family and other things. I think he is absolutely the person to lead this country going forward. It'll completely change the tone of what we have in them, and give people that have never had hope in their life, give them hope. You know, some of these marginalized communities have never had hope. We talk about the great pandemic we're living through today. Marginalized communities have lived in a pandemic their whole life. And so think about that. Think about not having health care, or one paycheck away from being homeless. Those fears that are very real. Marginalized communities live in that fear every day. And so what Joe Biden brings is a hope to a country, a hope to people that have never had a voice. And I absolutely believe with him and Kamala, they will give people that have never had a voice, give them a seat at the table. And that's why I'm supporting both of them wholeheartedly.
And I think that is an amazing reason to support them. And I also agree they're going to give us so much hope. And I'm really looking forward to that election in November, along with yours. Addressing climate change is one of your most important policy issues. What will you do to address climate change in a state like Utah?
Well, I will be elected if I'm lucky enough to be able to serve here as a congressman in the federal government. Not only will some of the changes we make affect Utah, but it'll affect the whole country. And really, that's what we need. I heard a scientist tell me one time that he said, I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. And then he said this, he said, I thought with 30 good years of science, we can make a difference. But he said, I was wrong. He said, the top environmental problems that we have today are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those things, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And he said, we scientists don't know how to do that. look, climate change is a big deal to me because of my Native American background. But I made the statement when we first started today, before most of you joined, that I live in Providence on one side of the Cache Valley, and today I can see the Wellsville Mountains not very far away because the smoke has cleared out a little bit. And while the wildfires have a big deal to do with that, there are days in the winter and other places that the air quality here in Utah is really terrible. And so making sure that we have clean air, making sure we have water that's drinkable, making sure that we take care of Mother Earth, making sure we live sustainable lives. Those things are just really, really deeply ingrained in me. And it's important that we start making those changes. And it all starts personally. It's not a Democrat problem, and it's not a Republican problem. It's an American problem. And we need to start making incremental changes today. Drive less, plant more trees. I mean, there's a lot of little things each family can do, but the government needs to set sustainable, reachable goals and make sure that we're meeting those goals. Technology, we still need to invest in technology to make sure that we can transition from the fossil fuel industry, which we need to get away from as fast as possible. And so I was really happy to see the Ute Mountain Utes sign a huge contract with the Department of Energy for solar and wind farms. And when we can do that and use technology, it's really important that we do that. I have a problem, and it's a good problem to have, but the Ute Nation out in CD1, they're my brothers and sisters, but their economic development relies on gas and oil production. So how do I go out there and tell them they finally have money because of those resources that we really need to start transitioning away? I can't do that, though, if I don't have other options and give them other ways to make a living. And so the more we invest in technology, and the more we invest in broadband to rural communities, we're really going to be able to start to change and give them hope, give them education, and give them ways to make a living in the places that they live. So that's why climate change is such a big deal. I'm not a penalize you for not doing it person. Although regulations are good, I would rather see maybe we reward people who are making positive changes with tax credits or other things. I mean, I would be certainly open to all of it, but we really need to start doing something.
Absolutely, I agree. Climate change is one of the biggest issues facing my generation, and I'm really proud to support you because of your hard stance on climate change. Along with climate change, protecting public lands is another one of your big policy standpoints and something that you deeply care about. What kinds of policies do you believe must be implemented to protect our public lands here in Utah?
Well, first and foremost, our public lands are not for sale. I know Congressman Bishop has worked really hard to make our public lands available to the state of Utah, which will absolutely sell it to the highest bidder. No questions asked. And who's the highest bidder? It's the extraction industries, those companies that will do fracking and oil and gas research. The last thing I want to see when I go to Zion's or Moab are oil wells or any traces of the extraction industries that they've been to. And so those federal lands are really, really important that we protect. The state of Utah, their motto to really promote the state is life elevated. Well, life elevated means we have such a beautiful resource that we need to protect it at all costs. And so as I look out my window and as I look at the mountains today, it's so important to me that we maintain that beauty that we have here. We live in the most diverse state in the country as far as the red rocks and the mountains and the deserts, and it's all beautiful, but we need to work hard to make sure that it stays under federal protection, because the state of Utah will sell it. And my Republican opponent is for returning all of those federal lands to the state. Now, just selfishly, we signed treaties, that Native Americans have signed treaties with the federal government that gives us certain rights on federal land. So even if for no other reason, for a selfish reason, tribal nations rely on those federal lands because of certain treaty rights and certain things we can do. So.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree that public lands are definitely under threat. And I know your opponent will try and get those leased out. And that's a super important factor to me. I know that's super important to a lot of the constituents here in District 1. So I really appreciate your stance on that. We are currently living through a once-in-a-century pandemic, which has affected Black and Brown communities at disproportionate rates, and a moment of national reckoning and addressing systemic racism and policing in our American culture as a whole. What kinds of policies would you support to bring true equity within historically marginalized communities, be that be in policing, housing, medical assistance, and education?
I've gone to a few Black Lives Matter rallies, and they've been wonderful to see. And so I know from a marginalized community that I come from, a Native American community, and we want to be heard. We want to have our concerns acknowledged. And so it's no longer okay to sit back and say, well, I'm not racist, and not do anything. I think we're at a point in time in America that we need to get involved. We need to elect officials that will take a strong stance and really want to make changes. And we need to sit down at the table and talk. Part of the problem with marginalized communities is they've never had a voice. They've never had a seat at the table. And so if we're going to change, we need to acknowledge the past. And having a terrible past is okay as long as we're learning, as long as we're trying to improve and get better. And so we need to do better in diversity of hiring. We need to make sure our communities have advisory councils and boards that sit on police councils. I saw an interview on TV. It was a sheriff from Salt Lake City, the woman sheriff, and she said that they just graduated a couple of people of color out of their police academy. And these people of color have come to Utah, immigrated to Utah not very long ago. And so when our communities and our police forces and our teachers and other things start reflecting the diversity of the communities that we live in, we're going to be much better off. But we've got to give them a seat at the table. We've got to listen, we've got to be open, and we've got to get actively involved. There are so many wonderful organizations out there that are working on this every day, and we need to support them. Do what we can to support them and volunteer when we can, but really make sure that those individuals and those individual communities have a seat at the table, which they've never had before. And so I will work hard every day to just make sure that their voices are heard. They're put in positions that they can actually affect change. And I think that's the way we systemically start rooting out some of this racism and other things that we've seen, frankly, since the beginning of our country. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Giving those marginalized communities a seat at the table will be essential to that change. In District 1, we have a pretty diverse district for Utah, and I think really having those boards represent who lives in the district is going to be essential. Next question is, why do you believe having these conversations around racism, inequalities, and past injustice are necessary for justice, equality, and the overall healing of our state and nation?
A lot of it was answered in that last question, but you know, it's important to have the conversations because you can't make change. You can't ever make change if you don't understand what the problem is and you don't understand how those marginalized communities feel. And so it's so vital that we sit down and listen and then actually take action to make those changes. But our country is not going to heal until we can acknowledge past wrongs. I look at people and people ask me every day, the Bear River Massacre was the largest massacre of Native Americans in the history of our country. And it happened 25 miles from my home. 450 Shoshones were massacred early in the morning on January 29th in 1863. And people ask me all the time, how can you forgive? How can you be so positive about something that was so horrific to your people? And I acknowledge that it was horrific, but I also acknowledge that there's nothing I can do about that today. The only thing I can do about that today is learn from it, learn what caused it, so I can maybe prevent it from happening again, and trying to forgive. I will always be one to extend a hand in friendship and forgive, always. And so we've got to get to the point in our country that I'm going to tell my story and I'm going to educate you on some horrific and hard things, but I'm not doing it to make you feel guilty. I'm just doing it so you're aware, because your awareness should cause you to move in action. And I think that action is what we all need from everybody in order to make these changes that we're going to need to make in the next few years.
Absolutely, and I think that action is going to be essential as well. This is our second to last question for those following. You are one of the first Native American candidates in Utah's history. What do you believe your nomination says about the importance of diversity in our ever-changing state of Utah and America at this point in our history? And what kinds of discussions do you believe must be had?
Well, when I was little, I used to think my teachers called America the great melting pot of the world. I haven't heard that term in a long time. And so what the great melting pot means to me is a variety and a diversity of cultures and people that have come together to make up something that is just beautiful and grand. And so I am probably the first Native American to run for a major office like this in Utah. What that tells me is our country has come a long way in some respects, that I would be lucky enough to be nominated to run as a Democrat. The Democrats would trust me enough to carry the banner forward and not look at the color of my skin or anything else and not have that be a factor, because forever being a Native American man or woman has been a factor and has been something that has been discriminated against. So I think we've made huge strides in being able to elect people of color, but there's so much more work to be done. So I'm excited to be part of just a diverse group of people, because our country's diverse, and it makes me sad that for far too long the white privilege system sometimes has done things to keep those other people down. And so I think we're finally getting to the point that we can start making those changes that we need to. And I'm just honored to be the first Native American from Utah to run. And I certainly hope I'm not the last. But I think I bring a unique voice. I will bring a unique voice to Congress. Deb Haaland, the first Congresswoman from New Mexico, first Native American woman Congresswoman from New Mexico, said this 2 years ago. She said, Congress has never heard a voice like mine. And I feel the same way. I think in order to make those changes, we need to maybe go back to the way the Native Americans did things hundreds of years ago. The Iroquois, and I'll just leave this with you. The Iroquois, I love their culture and I love their leadership, because Iroquois leaders don't make any decisions without considering what effect it would have on 7 generations ahead. I mean, think about that. Think about how amazing and awesome that their leadership is thinking about any decision we make. What is it going to do to 7 generations down the road? We have never had those thoughts. Our leaders have never had those thoughts. But I think it's time we start putting our children and grandchildren at the front of the line and making sure they're taken care of. So that's a perspective I'll bring and hopefully be able to take it to Washington.
And I think that perspective is so necessary during these times, especially when addressing problems like systemic racism and climate change, which we have both discussed today. In conclusion, what do you believe is your greatest personal attribute that you will bring to representing District 1? And what do you most look forward to in representing District 1?
I think one of my greatest strengths, and don't laugh at this because it really is a strength to me, and it's my ability to not get offended. Think about that. Think about how many times, and I've had to work on it. I wasn't born this way, but over the last 15, 20 years of my life, I've worked so hard to see people and hear people and see different opinions and just try not to ever be offended. That's given me a perspective that allows me to learn, even though sometimes we may look at somebody and think, I'm not going to learn one thing from them because they're not like me at all. But I think not being offended in a world today that screams for us to be offended at every turn, I think that is a sign of the kind of leadership that we need today, to be able to sit down and tackle some of the hard issues that are facing America and hear somebody's point of view and not be offended by it. And so that's a big deal to me. The thing I'm looking forward to most is being able to represent the people in the first district, all of the people. I know I'm running as a Democrat, and the majority of the people living in the district, well, are registered Republicans. I'm sure there's a lot that are independent and somewhere in between. But I want you to know my commitment to you is it will always be people over party. And if that isn't good for you, I'm sorry. But people, your values, what you value and what you think are most important to me. And I want to be a representative that represents the people of the values of the people that live here in this district. And so I will never put our party over the people that I represent. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to, and just changing the tone in Washington, D.C. I think it's time. So thank you for the opportunity you guys have given me today. I feel honored to be here. And I may not be the candidate for every person. We may not align on every single little issue, but I'll tell you what, I'll work hard every day to do the right thing for the right reason. And that's my commitment to you.